So the mayor had suggested to make that a priority, and somebody suggested to make a pilot project in June.
Mm-hmm.
And can you describe that and why that was pushed to December? Is it December of next year? Is that right?
For the full construction is actually in spring of 2013. Okay. So the reason, so in the injunction in the lawsuit for the bicycle master plan really kind of cast a shadow over a lot of the bicycle projects that we do, and we have to make sure that everything that we do is fully vetted, environmentally cleared, to really a very high bar for bicycle projects. And having worked in lots of other places in California and throughout the West, you know, the bar is much higher in San Francisco. And wanting to make sure that whatever we put on the streets, we've made sure to disclose all the impacts and follow all the rules. And the only place where the rules are a little less rigorous is around pilot projects, but you really have to be piloting something. I mean, you need to point to it and say, this is something we've never tried anywhere else, and so we're piloting it here. And so I think that originally the thought was that if we could, that we might be piloting at the time a parking buffered cycle track. That was one of the original ideas before we really looked carefully at the travel lane removal. Once we started to look at the travel lane removal and sort of talked a little bit more closely, both internally at MTA and with the Board of Supervisors and others, we sort of felt like that wasn't necessarily going to be the design for Oak and Fell, because the travel lane removal was going to turn it into such a large project. And at that point, there really ceases to be something that you're piloting, because we're really talking about a bike lane that might look like what we have on Market Street or in a lot of other places. And so then we're not in a pilot phase anymore, so we really need to make sure that we do the environmental review and clearance to the degree that it needs to be done. And those rules are all in place to really protect the public and make sure that you're disclosing impacts of everything that you do. And so people have lots of opportunity to weigh in and have lots of opportunity for input. So they're there for a good reason. And once we stopped having something that we were piloting, we were sort of back on a traditional kind of project schedule. So that's...
I also heard that neighbors along the street were complaining that their parking was going to be removed. Did that have any influence on your timeline?
I would say no. I mean, that's something that we expected. We always knew that this project would have, potentially some significant impacts on the neighborhood. It would either be removing a travel lane or removing parking, and we know that parking is often contentious, no matter where we do it in the city. So that was something that we fully expected. And when we went to the community in the fall and we proposed the different options, we always said that it was going to take us through the spring to go through the planning phase, and that's where we're at now. We're ready to wrap up the planning phase, within the next month or so. So, any of the objections it was always something that we anticipated.
We knew we would need to go through a really careful process because of the trade-offs that we were talking about. So that was always kind of buffered, was always there in the schedule.
So you don't see any possibility of construction starting earlier in spring?
I don't think so. It's, everything, we need to finish our detailed design before we can go to environmental review, and we have to finish our environmental review before anything can be legislated. And then the legislative process, we have an internal legislative process at the MTA, which is somewhat, it takes a long time. You've got to start internally, and then it goes up through it steps to the board. And then we're also going to legislate through the Board of Supervisors because of Oak Street, because it being it was a long-term project, but we're doing it now. And so there are sort of dual legislative processes that have to move forward that have their sort of immovable timelines. And so to take all those steps, to finish the planning now, to get through the detailed design in the next few months, to go through the environmental review, which will take another few months after that, and then to go through the legislative process, takes us through, the first quarter of next year. And then the construction itself will take, a month or so to complete, assuming the project is approved and goes through. So it's important for us to make sure that anything that we put out on the street, especially if the project is controversial, that we make sure that we do everything according to the rules, so that whatever we put out there is really rock solid, and we know that we're making an investment in something that's going to stay there for a long time, that won't be sort of challenged and taken away.
The Board of Supervisor resolution calls for 20% of trips by bicycle by 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you see this being achieved, given that like putting in physically separate bike lanes can remove parking and removing travel lanes, and it could increase congestion in the city? Mm-hmm. And how do you balance those goals?
We're really trying to meet the Board of Supervisors' goal of 20% of all trips being made by bike by 2020. And that is a really big challenge for us. And looking around both the U.S. and the world at some of our heroes, our hero cities, it's going to take a tremendous commitment in terms of dollars. And that money needs to be spread around to engineering and infrastructure, but also to places where we don't typically spend a lot right now. So marketing, encouragement. The research is that people change their travel habits when they see that they can see another one as being really normal. So really showing people that everybody bikes, all different types of people ride bikes, those kinds of marketing campaigns to normalize bicycling is a critical important step for us to take. Enforcement, education, casual riders. Those people want to ride on low-volume streets. They want, or paths. They want a big separation from traffic. And so, we need to be building things that we haven't been building yet on some of those sort of slower, lower-volume streets. So those kinds of things, I think, are not going to be as controversial, and they're areas where we really need to invest a little more effort.
So I've heard a statistic that something like 40 to 60% of people would like to bike more, mm-hmm. But they don't feel safe. Mm-hmm. So it seems like getting that infrastructure on the ground first would be most important. Like if you look at Copenhagen, like mm-hmm. they have great infrastructure, like many physically separated bike lanes, and they have up to 50% of cyclists, 50% mode share cycling.
Yeah, the infrastructure has to be there. I mean, that's the availability of the infrastructure is one of the key sort of first steps. When people make decisions about how to travel, that's one of the first things, part of their mental calculus is, can I get from point A to point B on this mode? Is the infrastructure there to support me? And so that's really critical. But I also think, even while we were enjoined, when we were under the injunction and really could not build anything and did not build anything for 3 years, bicycle ridership continued to grow on a pretty steady trajectory. So that suggests that there are larger trends at work and larger kind of things going on in the world that are forcing or where people are making different decisions about how they travel, regardless of whether or not the infrastructure is there. And if you look at Copenhagen and Amsterdam, they invest almost as much into their marketing and into kind of it's called individual social marketing, where you try and get people to make different decisions using sort of traditional advertising tactics. They invest almost as much in that as they do in their infrastructure. And that's, granted, they're already way ahead of us in infrastructure, but I think that's something that gets really undervalued, and it could be incredibly cost effective in terms of the return that you get on your investment. So yeah, we have to continue to build the network, and that's by far the most expensive piece of the strategy. but encouraging people to get out and use it is something we could be doing right now and seeing an even bigger sort of boom in cycling than we're already experiencing.
I worked for the Bike Coalition, the Bay Area Bike Coalition, on Bike to Work Day. And we did a lot of that, educating people, encouraging people to get out there. But I did start to feel kind of guilty in a way, because I felt like I was encouraging people to get out there who a lot of them actually had never been riding in the city before. And I felt like I was kind of putting them out there without giving them the safety and the infrastructure that they needed. And possibly maybe they would be injured, and I would feel like I was kind of like responsible in a way. So I feel like, yeah, infrastructure is one of the most important things to do. But like, as I said, there's so much resistance from people who drive. So yeah, I just want to make sure that like that's a priority.
Oh yes, it absolutely is a priority to continue to build out the bike network and to go back and look at the things we've already built and see if there are ways to make them better. You know, their bike design is evolving at a pretty rapid rate, and you know, the design tools that we've been using have only been good enough to get us to about 3.5% of people, or 3.5% of trips being made by bike. So clearly we have to do something different on the infrastructure side, and that's something that is going to be, for livable streets, we are the team in charge of implementation, so that will always be, the heart of what we do.
One last question. Why do you think it's important to make streets safer for cyclists and pedestrians?
Well, there are a lot of reasons. There's I've heard it said that transportation users are like a food chain, and when you make things safer for the most vulnerable users, it has ripple effects that go all the way up the chain. And so when you make streets safer for bicycling and walking, you make them safer for everyone. You make them safer for people taking transit, for people driving, so they have really far-reaching benefits focusing on those two modes. On top of the fact that, we have an obligation to make sure that we've done everything that we think we can do to help people get places in a safe way. And not just in terms of measurable things like collisions, but how they feel, their own perception of how safe it is to get from one place to another. The places where people bicycle and walk and feel safe and comfortable are, it's been sort of proven over and over again. They're great neighborhoods. Their property values go up. People that shop by bike tend to spend more over time at local businesses, and so there is an economic development benefit that sort of, again, like reaches out beyond just the person on the bike or the person walking. So there are obviously big societal benefits to reducing the collisions and costs around injuries and those kinds of things, and clearly public health benefit as well, and then there are environmental benefits. But beyond all of that, the thing that really people identify with bicycling when you ask them about what they feel when they're on a bike is joy and happiness, and sort of building communities and improving people's quality of life is something that transportation planners and engineers have a tremendous opportunity to influence. And so that's, there are all the sort of usual suspects that you could go down the list and talk about, but, kind of at the foundation is really improving people's quality of life through transportation. So, I don't know. Do you have anything you want to add?
I think that was pretty complete.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.